Officers in the small town of Cresco, Iowa, were conducting a welfare check on the home of a 25-year-old mother and her 8-year-old daughter. They knocked and no one answered. They looked inside the windows. There was no TV on, no sounds coming from inside, but they saw candles burning, getting dangerously low, and some were already in small mounds of wax. And they decide they better enter and see what's going on. No one had heard from Angela and her daughter Ashley for at least a day now. Angela didn't show up for work, which was highly unusual, and little Ashley wasn't in school. There were dishes in the sink, a fan humming in the hallway like someone had just stepped out of the room for a moment. Angela's purse was still on the counter, her makeup bag, her curling iron, all the things she would never just leave behind, not even for a quick overnight trip. There wasn't blood or broken glass or anything seemingly out of place, except the bad feeling that something wasn't right. It was the silence, the little details, the way it felt like someone had just left in the middle of living. Where were Angela and Ashley? The answers wouldn't be found in Angela's quiet little house. It all started at a local carnival. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you've never been here before, I am Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. And if you have been here, you will know that I have been busy. I launched a YouTube membership, a Patreon, a brand new YouTube channel where I'm talking about current cases. I go live every day. If you haven't checked that out, I encourage you to do so because we've been having a great time over there. It's easy to remember. It's just Kimbyrleigha Live. Makes sense, right? It's just same name as my channel, my name. We've been making friendships, analyzing trials, and really just becoming an even closer community. And spoiler alert, I have a Brian Koberger video coming out as well as a Diddy breakdown for you. But with all of this running around, with a baby, a house remodel, which by the way, I have a sneak peek for you today, but there has been everything going on and I want to stay looking my best, of course, but that also means feeling my best. And part of that is smelling fresh. I know you can relate. And if you haven't switched to aluminum and paraben-free deodorant, this is your sign that you need to. I found this brand. I'm going to tell you all about it because they are partnering with me today, and that is wild. Oh my gosh, I've been using them for over a year now, and the last time I purchased one of these little containers, which I'm going to tell you about, it had ghosts on it. We're going to get there. These are refillable cases for your deodorant, and they come in a bunch of different colors and designs, and you can even get them customizable. I have my name on this one. It says Kimber. I'll show it to you up close as well, but I'm going to tell you, first thing that's so important, other than how cute all these designs are, I've been using the ghost one all year round because I like spooky things, but I'm going to also be showing you what I got in my last package. The best thing about these products is that they don't compromise when it comes to effectiveness though, because they keep you fresh for 24 hours. These little things right here, these refills, I run around a lot, I'm telling you, and it works. This company is also sustainable. You know why? Because single-use plastic is not good. Instead, they offer compostable refills in these little containers that I'm showing right here. And this means that they have saved over 1.6 million pounds of single-use plastic from going into landfills. I feel good about that. I think it's something that you can feel good about as well. And Wild products are also Leaping Bunny certified. They're vegan and cruelty-free. And now let's get to my favorite part, which is the scents. They have seasonal scents. They have cute designs, limited edition. But I'm telling you right now, you're going to love the texture. It's creamy, it's smooth, and that is because of the shea butter. Now, my personal scent will always be the coconut vanilla. That is what I like. It's like the tried and true classic scent. You just pop off the bottom, stick the refill on top, close the container, and twist up and roll to the top. Less waste, super cute. And if you are obsessed with lip balm like I am, guess what? They also have refillable lip balm and, of course, the cute cases to match so you can personalize and match everything. Because if you like being matchy-matchy like I do, that's the best part. So if you want to discover more about Wild, look below for my special link as well as the QR code on the screen and use my code Kimbyrleigha and you can get 20% off all products, but my code doesn't last long. So make sure you use it today. And thank you so much to Wild for making this video possible. Now let's get into our case for today. So let me set the stage for you again and get back into where we were. I'm taking you to Cresco, Iowa. It isn't the kind of place where bad things happen. It's the kind of small town vibe. Kids grow up riding bikes on quiet streets. Neighbors wave from their porches. And everyone seems to know everyone's name. In Cresco, doors are left unlocked. People stop to talk at the local grocery store. And a trip to the local carnival is the highlight of every summer. It's a community that's built around trust, family, and faith. So when a tragedy strikes here, it doesn't just hurt, it shakes everyone to their core. It was Monday morning, July 9th. It's summer in this small town. Angie's friends and coworkers are alarmed when she doesn't show up to work for her shift at the local Fairway grocery store. She's been working there for a few years now. They called her, but there was no answer. They went by her house and they knocked on the door and it was silent. But there were signs that something was amiss right away. Angie's 1997 Grand Prix, it was a gold car that she drove all the time. It was not parked in her driveway. So her friends wondered where she could have gone. They checked the school, and her 8-year-old daughter, Ashley, didn't make it to class. And not only that, her bike and a garden hose was just left scattered across the lawn. Angie was known to be very tidy, not to leave things out like this, especially over a weekend. It just wasn't like her. But not only that, when they looked in the windows, they saw candles still burning. And that was it. They called the police. There was no way Angie would leave her candles burning like that and just gone somewhere. There were piles of melted wax that had burned all the way down to the end of the wick. Where was she? And where was Ashley? It was really confusing. But let me tell you more about who Angela is, and then maybe it will make more sense why everyone wondered where she could have gone. Angela Danette Hyke was born right there in Cresco, just after Christmas on December 31st of 1975. But her childhood wasn't quite typical. Angela wasn't raised by her biological parents, Frances and Audrey Hyke. Instead, her upbringing fell into the hands of her paternal grandmother, Agnes, and her step-grandfather, Gerald McGee. While we don't know exactly why Angela ended up with her grandparents, family dynamics like these aren't that uncommon in a tight-knit community. Whatever those reasons were, Angela's grandparents stepped up, determined to provide her with stability, love, and the warmth of a real home. Angela thrived under their care. Growing up, she was the kind of girl that everyone adored. She was bright-eyed and bubbly and always laughing, and people all over Cresco described Angela, who ended up going by Angie, as sunshine in human form. She was always happy, and she had a gift for making others feel good. She would effortlessly just spread happiness with a smile, and it felt genuine. And it was probably because her grandparents instilled strong values in her, guiding her towards being kind and responsible, and above all, having faith. Angie was deeply connected to her local church, the Notre Dame Parish Assumption Worship Center, and her faith wasn't just something that she believed, it was something she lived. She would actively teach her CCD classes to the youngest members of the parish, and this is a religious education program for children and youth, and it's the Catholic school version of Sunday school. Angie wasn't just teaching these children lessons about religion. She would show them by example how to be compassionate and kind-hearted. But beyond her spiritual life, Angie had a creative streak that everyone admired. She was the type of friend who, and I know you have a friend like this, who could take like bits of ribbon and paper and they could make it into something really unique and special. And she would gift her creations to her friends and loved ones on birthdays, holidays, or just a random afternoon. It didn't matter. And they would cherish every little handcrafted surprise because it showed just how much Angie cared about them. Even animals would gravitate towards Angie. There was just something pure about her spirit. And she was the person that the dogs would just run up to, wagging their tails. The ones that a cat would come up and, they would wrap around her leg and purr softly. She showed the same kindness that she showed her community to animals as well. And life moved forward in Cresco, although at a slow pace. And Angie grew into a lovely young woman. After graduating from Crestwood High School in 1994, she began working as a clerk at the local Fairway grocery store, a job that perfectly suited her warm and outgoing personality. Angie loved her customers. She would chat with each and every one, getting to know them and remembering them as she rang up their groceries. And everyone left Fairway happier than when they came, and that was all because of Angie. But her life wasn't perfect. Nobody's is. And at one point, she met a man named Bert Lucas. Despite their significant age difference, Bert being 18 years older, the two connected instantly, and their relationship led to the birth of a beautiful daughter on April 12th of 1993, Ashley Nicole Lucas. Angie was about 18 at the time, and well, I was doing the math, And I think that meant that Bert was around 36 years old. And I'm not going to go too deep into this. I don't know when they initially met, if she was under the age of consent, which is 16 in Iowa. But interestingly, when I looked, I found something new that I'd never heard of. It's what's called the Romeo and Juliet law there. That allows 14 and 15-year-old teenagers to consent to intercourse with partners as long as they're no more than 4 years older. So a 14-year-old and a 19-year-old is okay, or a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old. Really, Iowa? But okay, back to Angie. She and Bert absolutely lived for little Ashley. She was the most adorable little girl. Like many little ones, she was cheerful and would be bouncing around smiling. She had striking blue eyes and golden blonde hair that was impossible not to notice. She got her daddy's eyes. Angie had sort of hazel green eyes, but Ashley's were blue like Bert's. And Ashley loved everything pink, from her room decor to her favorite Barbie dolls. Like her mother, she brought smiles to everyone who knew her. Angie would joke that Ashley had enough mischief in her to keep her on her toes, especially when they visited Fairway Supermarket. When Angie was working, Ashley loved to tag along and meet up with her mom at work. She would be giggling and placing those little price stickers on Angie's back, and she would just be so amused by her antics of her mom not knowing they were there. And that sounds so relatable, just joking around with your mom. Even after Angie and Bert's relationship ended, which was what I was getting at, that life wasn't perfect, they managed to co-parent very well. Bert stayed actively involved. He lived just a short distance away in the same small town, and he saw Ashley every single day without fail. He was close enough to do that, and he was the local mailman. Everyone knew Bert. He started the job when Ashley was just 2 years old, probably thinking he needed a reliable source of income to help support her. He had dropped out of high school and got his GED when he was younger, and then he enlisted in the Army. But unfortunately, due to a medical issue, he couldn't continue his service, and he returned back to Cresco, where he grew up. Before becoming a mailman, he did manage several convenience stores and even purchased one of his own, but that became way too much to manage, so he sold it. It was 1995 when he saw that ad in the local newspaper, and he decided to apply as a mailman on a whim. Everyone in town knew him as Bert the mailman. They would watch the tall, lanky, tan man walk up all smiles and deliver their parcels. And over time, they would greet him in many different ways. They would wave, of course. They would say hello by honking their horns as they passed. And they would even yell out his name from windows as he drove by. Small town vibes, as I explained. Even the cops in town would turn on their sirens and lights just for a second to let him know that they saw him, like they were waving hello. He was a very loyal employee, never even called out sick, not once in his entire career. He took the same route every single day, and his favorite part of the job was the children. They looked forward to him, they looked up to him, and he watched them grow. He would even bring families pizzas and ice cream and hand out lollipops on his stops. I mean, who wouldn't like that, right? But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's go back. After Angie and Bert broke up, she was perfectly fine with him coming over to see Ashley, and even if it was just a little hello, and then there were times where he would take her for a whole weekend. And this arrangement seemed to work for everyone, especially Ashley. She had the comfort of knowing both of her parents were always nearby, especially because, like many little girls, Ashley was afraid of the dark, but she was really afraid. She would wake up screaming and crying for her mom in the middle of the night. Nighttime was really difficult for her. She tried leaving the light on for her daughter or other methods to calm Ashley, but Angie couldn't find anything that really worked. But she knew exactly how to comfort her if things did go wrong. She would run into her room. She would sit with Ashley, reassuring her that she was safe, she was loved and protected, and that there was nothing wrong, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But it's sad to think that apparently there was something to be afraid of. They just didn't know it yet. Angie and Ashley's days were filled with a combination of work, fun, school, and community. It was the simple life. It was the kind of life that makes tragedy seem impossible, almost unreal. No one in Cresco could have guessed that such a peaceful existence could be shattered so suddenly, violently, and without warning. But that's exactly what happened. And this community's illusion of safety was about to be torn apart. Bad things can happen. They can happen anywhere, even in small towns, to nice people, to anyone. But let's go back to that Monday. It was the morning of July 9th of 2001. After Angie's friends came to check her house, they called 911, and Kimberly Orth was dispatched to the scene. Now, there's a little background on Officer Kimberly Orth. This town was small. I've told you that. Under 4,000 people. And Kimberly, the officer who's now conducting a welfare check, is not just a cop. She's a friend of Angie's. They're practically neighbors. She lived 2 blocks away. She knew Angie and little Ashley very well. So she was even concerned, knowing that they were not home and that Angie's car wasn't there. She walked up, she knocked, no one answered, which was already expected by this time. And Angie's granddad had been alerted, and he was pulling up when Kimberly and another officer came by. Angie's granddad had the key to her house, and they entered the home together with the cops with their guns drawn, not knowing what to expect. In the living room, the candles were now burning to little stubs, and they had clearly been burning for hours. Kimberly blew the rest of the candles out and then cleared the room, making sure there wasn't anyone hiding inside. The fan was still running, just humming steadily, untouched since the night before. Moving into the kitchen, she saw dishes lingering in the sink, leftovers from dinner that Angie didn't even bother to clean, which was completely out of character for someone who was very meticulous and cared about her home like Kimberly knew Angie did. And then that's when she spotted Angie's purse on the counter. That stood out. If Angie left, she would have most certainly taken her purse with her. In the bathroom, Kimberly noticed all of Angie's makeup was still out, like she just used it. Her curling iron, her hairdryer were there too. Things that she would have packed if, let's say, she went on a trip. Ashley's toys were scattered on the floor of her room and throughout the house, now just eerily frozen in time, in the same places that they'd been the previous night. Audrey Hyke, who was Angie's stepmom, told police that Angie was the type of person to shut everything off and even unplug appliances when she left, especially if she was going on a trip. And Ashley's Nintendo, it was like the little one you take everywhere, that was still there. It was left behind. That was unusual. As well as Angie's contact lenses and her glasses. I wear contact lenses and glasses every single day. At night, I use my glasses, contacts during the day. So her stepmom knew she can't even see without them. There was no way she would have left them there. So she did not leave on her own. So at this point, without finding any clues as to where Angie had gone, the officers decided to do 2 things. 1, they put out a bolo to be on the lookout for Angie's vehicle, a gold 1997 Grand Prix with a license plate 799 BFP. Secondly, they began to canvass the neighborhood to see if anyone had seen Angie. They focused their efforts on a 2 to 3 block radius, thinking that they would start there and then move outward. They went door to door, questioning neighbors, each conversation bringing them closer to understanding the last moments Angie and Ashley spent at their home. One neighbor said they recalled seeing Ashley outside around 9 or 9:30 p.m. on Sunday night, so the night before, and she was playing in the yard, running through the water from the garden hose, and playing on her bike. Interesting that the bike and the hose were left on the lawn on Monday when the officers and friends went by. Another neighbor offered a strange observation, something that immediately stood out. He said he was driving by Angie's house between 5 and 6 a.m. the same morning, Monday, and noticed that Angie's Grand Prix was backed into her driveway, and that stuck out. Angie never parked her car that way because she dented it during a prior accident where she ran into her house, so she avoided backing up at all costs. He knew that. So seeing her car backed in that way in the morning made him pause and made him look and kind of do a double take. And now that she's missing, he's racking his brain to see if he can remember anything. It was weird how the car was positioned, a way that she wouldn't have parked it. And then he noticed that someone was sitting in the driver's seat. But he said he wasn't sure it was Angie because it looked like a woman, but it looked like she had lighter hair than Angie. Angie's hair was like an auburn brown. This almost looked blonde. He said he couldn't be 100% sure it was her. So after this, Officer Orth, Kimberly, she goes back into Angie's home. She enters her friend's bedroom and she begins looking for anything that might lead to a clue to help her track Angie down. And that's when she notices Angie's diary. It's like a day planner / journal where she knows that Angie writes everything down, her plans, her thoughts, everything, things like that. It's sitting out on the dresser. Kimberly puts on a pair of gloves, picks up the diary, puts it into an evidence bag. She just had such a bad feeling about everything. Everything she knew so far makes her decide that she's going to declare Angie's house a crime scene and get technicians in right away to collect anything that they see as evidentiary value. And next, Kimberly, and I hope it's okay that I'm calling her Kimberly. That's because she is an officer, but she's also a friend. But Officer Kimberly Orth wanted to speak with someone she knew would be keeping tabs on Angie, her ex-boyfriend, Bert Lucas. He saw Ashley daily, and he was also the mailman, so he would have been driving around town that morning. Did he see anything? Or would he have a reason to make Angie disappear? Kimberly was interested to see if Ashley was maybe at Bert's house, because that would be a sign that he may know something. He'd already been alerted to what was going on. There was a message on his answering machine. They left it for him, and when he got off work, he listened. And he expected the police to come speak with him. In situations like these, investigators always start close to home, often with very good reason. But Bert was cooperating fully. He was shaken just by the message. Can you imagine? It literally just said, Angie and Ashley are missing. And I think any parent that gets that kind of news would be an absolute wreck. And he was like, what do you mean they're missing? He told police the last time he spoke to Ashley was on Sunday, before her and her mother just vanished. Ashley was excited. She told him all about a canoe trip she was taking with her mom and her mom's best friend, Lisa. Bert's emotions seemed genuine. He seemed like a distraught father who was worried about his daughter's safety. He told the officers that he knew Angie. He knew she would never just take their daughter anywhere without letting him know. That was very concerning. She had never done that since the day Ashley was born. And in Cresco, the news traveled fast, especially the kind that you hope you'll never hear. And by that Monday afternoon, word about Angela and Ashley's disappearance had spread. Neighbors gathered in small groups on their porches and on the sidewalks, and they were exchanging those worried looks, and they were quietly whispering things. This wasn't supposed to happen in this town. The biggest scandal there was usually a person who loses their pet or an argument over property lines. But now a mother and daughter were gone, vanished, seemingly into thin air with no clues left behind. Detectives moved fast, but the investigation was already complicated. The scene at Angie's home, even though there were no obvious signs of violence, it was unsettling. There was just this eerie absence of them not being there anymore. Even though there were no overturned furniture, no broken windows, no blood trail, just a disturbing normalcy of everything. Like they had just been plucked away on a normal evening. The police knew they had to widen their search, so they put out a bulletin with Angie and Ashley's information. 25-year-old Angie had shoulder-length, curly, sometimes straightened, brown hair and green eyes. She was 5 feet tall and weighed about 160 pounds. 8-year-old Ashley was only 4 feet tall and 92 pounds with blonde hair and blue eyes. And anyone with information about their whereabouts were told to call Cresco police immediately. And by the middle of that week, the community was rallying around Bert. He was a wreck. Bert couldn't help but wonder if his daughter was safe, or if she was dead or alive, or if she needed her daddy, if she was calling out to him, his words in an interview. This period was incredibly difficult for him. He knew his daughter had that fear of the dark, so he said that he just hoped wherever she was, it was well lit and she was safe. Everyone wanted to help any way that they could, because everyone loved Angie and everybody loved Bert, and they just couldn't believe that his daughter was gone. But Angie was just so loving and happy. It was just shocking to know that she was gone, disappeared. Bert would just cry, thinking about where they could be. No one had seen Angie's car anywhere in town, so chances were if they were taken away, they were far away from Cresco at this point. And even though Bert appeared to be seemingly distraught, even telling everyone that he wasn't eating or sleeping since knowing they were gone, investigators were still cautious. They verified Bert's alibi rigorously. Bert said he had been at a local bar on Sunday evening watching a sports game, and then he went straight home. Police talked to everyone that they could. Bartenders, patrons, coworkers, they all confirmed Bert's story. He was exactly where he said he was, and his emotional state matched the panic of a father that was truly worried about his child. His boss also confirmed he was at work on Monday morning, as expected. Next, police spoke to Angie's friend Lisa, who Bert claimed went on a canoe trip with her and Ashley on Sunday. Lisa said she spent the whole day with Angie and Ashley. confirming they had been happy and healthy the last time she saw them, which was about 5:30 p.m. And she has no idea what could have happened afterward. At this point, it was clear that this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. They were truly missing, and this situation was growing more urgent by the day. They were determined not to lose precious time, so the people of Cresco jumped into action. They organized themselves to raise awareness. They had flyers designed immediately featuring pictures of Angie and Ashley and detailed descriptions of the missing mother and daughter, and contact information for anyone with tips. But the townspeople knew they needed to reach more than just their quiet community. They needed eyes across the country. So they had a very clever idea. They realized that truck drivers could be used as their lifeline. Truckers would travel from coast to coast, passing through countless cities and towns. So if anyone were to have seen Angie and Ashley, it might be someone on the road. So the residents began handing out flyers directly to truckers as they stopped through town, pleading with them to please keep their eye out during their long hauls. They hoped desperately that somewhere along America's highways, someone might have recognized these faces that were staring back at them in these flyers. And meanwhile, investigators were hard at work tracking down any financial activity connected to Angie. They carefully reviewed her bank accounts and her financial records, searching for anything suspicious or out of the ordinary. But initially, nothing stood out. But still, as a protective measure, detectives quickly placed a freeze on Angie's checking accounts. This meant that any attempt to cash a check or use any of her financial resources would immediately trigger an alert, providing police with a much-needed lead. Every hour mattered, and while the flyers and the bank alerts offered some hope, the town was beginning to think something even worse may have happened, something sinister, and that Angie and Ashley were in grave danger. And then, suddenly, a promising tip broke through the tension. A small, blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl had been spotted at a nearby truck stop, and for a fleeting moment, Bert's heart was full of hope. He was like, this is Ashley. Had someone finally found his daughter? But unfortunately, that hope was short-lived. The crushing news came in that this was not Ashley, and that pain of being disappointed like that hit him so hard. Each dead end was a new wave of grief and frustration, and Bert was forced to once again confront the agony of not knowing where in the world his little girl was, or if she was still alive. And the detectives found themselves at a frustrating standstill as well. No clear suspects had emerged, and every potential lead seemed to slip away as quickly as it appeared. The clock was ticking, and investigators struggled to find any clues that might finally break this case wide open. And then they turned their attention back to Angela's home, hoping maybe they overlooked something. They finally decided to carefully examine something deeper, though, Angie's diary. Because diaries could reveal a lot of things, hidden truths, secret fears, important encounters, and Angie's diary was no exception. It did offer detectives an intriguing new lead. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Angie had attended a wedding alongside a local police officer, but not her female friend Kimbyrleigha. This was a male officer, someone that hadn't come forward yet. Investigators quickly brought him in for questioning, curious as to why he hadn't initially told them he was with Angie before she vanished. The officer explained that he hadn't mentioned their outing simply because he knew he wasn't the last person to see Angie. After all, she had gone canoeing with Lisa, her best friend, the very next day. So after thoroughly verifying his account, investigators cleared him as a suspect, and once again, they were left searching for answers. However, the piece about the wedding wasn't the only interesting piece of information that the officers learned from Angie's diary. Between the lines of everyday details and ordinary worries, detectives discovered something else. Angie mentioned meeting someone new, someone she playfully referred to in her diary as Backrub Clay. She said they met during the county fair that had just come through town recently. That seemed innocent enough, just a passing encounter at the fairgrounds. But to investigators, it stood out. This was someone new, someone unknown, someone who might have answers. The county fair, I'm sure most of you know, you have one in your hometown. One day you're just driving down your normal route, and then out of nowhere, an entire parking lot is full of bright colors, flashing lights, and towering rides just appearing out of nowhere, turning an ordinary farmland or a fairway into a magical, chaotic world full of swirling excitement. The Ferris wheel towering above everything else, slowly rotating, and its glowing lights a signal to those young and old to come have some fun. You can almost hear children laughing high above the ground, mixed with screams of delight and fear from thrill seekers clinging to their seats on rides that are spinning and tilting. The air smells different. A mix of sweet, irresistible cotton candy and funnel cakes, dusted generously with powdered sugar, and buttery popcorn popping endlessly. It's magical. It really is. Especially for a little one like 8-year-old Ashley. The perfect outing for mother and daughter. But who was this mystery man that Angie met? Why did he already have a pet name? Especially one like Backrub Clay? I didn't want to say it, but I couldn't help but think, well, this man was giving Angie a back rub. What other reason could there have been? So they asked around town, was there a Clay that lived in Cresco? If so, the man wasn't this Clay, not back rub Clay. And unfortunately, by the time the officers uncovered this information, that fair had already left Cresco. They only stay in town maybe a week or so at most, and they couldn't rely on asking any of the workers if they knew someone by that name, because perhaps he wasn't a patron, but instead an employee. And then the detectives learned that the fair was operated by Evans United Shows, and they weren't about to let this clue go cold, so they were determined and they drove 20 miles to the next town where the carnival workers were setting up their next event. And they began questioning workers, hoping they were going to find a lead, asking everyone, do you know someone named Clay? Their persistence finally paid off. Some workers started to say, yeah, wait a minute, I do know Clay. Does he look like this? Does he have glasses? Does he have this kind of hair? And finally, they were able to piece together that his name was Clay Irwin Thomas, a 24-year-old carnival worker that had been camping at the Cresco Fairgrounds along with the rest of the carnival crew. Now, they said he hadn't been working for the carnival long, but they did give a description. The carnival came to Howard County on June 24th, and Clay passed through Cresco around July 8th when the fair left to the next stop, which was the same time Angie and Ashley went missing. And from her diary entry, we know that she came in contact with Clay before the carnival left. Considering he was a ride operator for the Tilt-A-Whirl, the detectives speculated that they probably met when Angie and Ashley rode on the ride, and they got to talking. But the way that Angie wrote about Clay, it seemed like she thought the encounter was flirtatious, and detectives questioned Angie's friends about a guy named Clay. And a couple of them said, yeah, she did tell us about a guy named Clay, but she didn't go into detail about what kind of relationship they had, where they met, only that they were hanging out. Clay apparently gave Angie and Ashley free rides on the Tilt-A-Whirl on June 24th, and she and Clay must have hit it off. That's all they knew, except that Angie had mentioned she wanted a vacation. She really needed one. She needed time to get away, time off. But they kept thinking she still wouldn't have left without telling anyone. And she would not have taken off with some random guy that she just met, especially a carny. I hope that doesn't offend anyone, but that is the way he was described, a carny passing through. Detectives want to speak to this Clay guy, but workers mentioned they hadn't seen him in quite a few days. The last time they recall seeing him was actually around when they were leaving Cresco. They think he left the fairgrounds on his bike and then returned a few hours later driving a car. That was interesting because Angie had a car that was missing. So they pressed the workers for more information. Was Clay with anyone? Was he alone? Was he with a woman and her daughter perhaps? But they said, no, I don't think so. But they did recall Clay looking for his wife, Bobby Joe. Yeah. This man was married, and that fact confused detectives. Clay's wife, Bobby Joe, worked at the merry-go-round. So then they were thinking, perhaps that's the ride that Angie and Ashley went on, or maybe they went on both, or all of them. Somehow they all came in contact, because the workers said Bobby Joe and Clay were always together. But if Angie knew he was married, there is no chance she would have been writing about him in her diary, hanging out with him. But the fact that Angie's neighbor said he saw her car backed up into her driveway, not the way she usually parked it, and there was a woman inside, but it didn't look like Angie, detectives now think it might have been Clay and Bobby Joe, who were driving Angie's car. So, did they steal it? Was Angie and Ashley with them that morning? Did they go willingly? And where are they now? To find out, the detectives put out another bulletin. This one was to be on the lookout for Clay and Bobby Joe Thomas and the gold 1997 Grand Prix. And as the hours went by, anxiety was raising even more. Can you imagine? Can you imagine your friend was totally gone, her daughter gone. She told you she met someone. You find out she met him at the carnival. And even her best friend said, oh, that's probably why she didn't tell me that she met him at the carnival, because she knew I'd probably be judgy about it. That's what Lisa said, her words. I can't imagine, because it's so out of the ordinary. And now you're thinking, did her car get stolen, or did she end up going with these people? So Agent Jim Wirtz from the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation joined forces with local police. He had Angie's phone records examined, and he found out that she received a phone call on Sunday night at 10:15 p.m. So that was the day everyone last saw her. And that's pretty late. And it came from a telephone booth, so we're talking payphone in Cresco. That was odd. But it did point toward someone that wasn't from the area. So maybe Clay. Just solidifying the assumption that she met up with him that night. So Agent Wentz also walked a block away from Angie's house to her local bank, and he wanted to see her bank statements in person and look for any activity. But there was nothing unusual. But he was able to keep tabs on them, but everything was silent. Until, suddenly out of nowhere, it wasn't. 1 week after police began their search for Clay, a check was cashed, or attempted to be cashed, in Wichita, Kansas. Now that immediately raised red flags. Angela couldn't possibly have been in Kansas willingly, could she? That's what they were thinking. Well, then there was activity on one of her credit cards in Wichita as well. So to Kansas, they went. It didn't take long before they confirmed their worst suspicions. The handwriting on that check was not Angie's. Fortunately, this particular store had recently upgraded their security cameras after experiencing a bunch of burglaries. So they installed these crystal clear surveillance cameras, and Kansas police reviewed the footage. They went through it meticulously. They were pausing and pausing as they went through. And finally, they saw a familiar face appear on the screen. It was Clay Thomas, the straight blonde hair in a bowl cut, exactly how they were told he was described. He was wearing the glasses, and he was trying to cash Angie's check, as if it were his own. And he wasn't alone. He was standing beside a blonde woman who was identified as his wife, Bobby Joe Thomas. But what was even more disturbing is that Angela's Grand Prix that was missing was plainly visible in the store's parking lot on camera. But despite the clarity of this footage, investigators don't see any trace of Angie or Ashley. So now it leaves them with the question that's incredibly terrifying at this point. If Clay and his wife were here, then where is Angie and her daughter? Why this was so disturbing is because these people were driving her car, clearly trying to use her check and her debit card. That's not good. Those are not good signs. And it wasn't long until Angie's gold Grand Prix was reportedly seen parked outside a local apartment complex in Wichita, Kansas. So they ran the address and it came back to being Clay Thomas's older brother's apartment. And by this time, they completed a background check on Clay Thomas. So I think it would be a good time to mention what they found. They began digging right into his past, and they uncovered disturbing patterns. 24-year-old Clayton Thomas's history was far from clean. He was born in St. Joseph, Missouri, and he'd spent his life entangled with law enforcement. Petty theft, drug offenses, battery charges, sex crimes, burglary, attacks against his own family, his mother and brother, and even his stepfather. Clay's rap sheet was long and troubling. It painted a picture not of someone who simply made some mistakes, but someone capable of true violence. He even attacked a corrections officer. Further investigation revealed another layer to Clay's complicated story. A serious car accident that happened 5 years earlier, and it had reportedly caused lasting brain issues. They found out that defense attorneys in past cases that he had frequently leaned on this fact, arguing that it impacted his judgment and his impulse control, and even caused brain damage. But detectives in those other cases hadn't been convinced. And the ones in Angie's case were skeptical as well. It seemed like many people made excuses for Clay, including his own mother, Dorothy Roberge. Clay was one of 5 children. Clay was only a young boy when his mother got a divorce from his father, and ever since then, Dorothy said she played the role of mom and dad, doing her very best to try to raise all of her kids. But since middle school, Clay was getting into trouble. That's why she decided to move out into what she referred to as the country, a more rural area called Atchison outside of Kansas City near the border of Kansas and Missouri. Atchison's quiet environment might have seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. The town's slower pace and tight-knit community could have offered them a sense of being anonymous and a chance to rebuild, or a chance to hide from prying eyes. But it didn't stop Clay. He was arrested that same year for shooting a gun, and of course, his mother had an excuse for the 13-year-old. She said he tried to shoot a squirrel out of a tree in town. He didn't know that you couldn't just fire a weapon in city limits. Huh. And how would a teen be taught otherwise? Maybe a parent would teach them? And why was a 13-year-old allowed to have a gun? Okay, maybe that was normal in rural areas. Well, that year, the state took away Dorothy's youngest child from her. I don't know the details, but I know it must have been serious. She said that changed her family. And by the time Clay was 15, he was getting into more trouble. He graduated to burglarizing businesses and even getting into fights. And he was even cited with disorderly conduct, and this went on for years. And by the time he was 19, he had that car accident. But of course, according to his mother, it wasn't his fault. Not at all. Because he wasn't even driving. Dorothy explained one of his friends was driving, and he was going past the speed limit, and he was also drinking, and he ended up slamming into a boat and a trailer that were being pulled away from the Missouri riverboat ramp. Wow. And she said her son was lucky to survive. Well, unlucky for his future victims, unfortunately. Not that I would wish death on anyone, but just wait. His mother said that he had the mentality of a 14-year-old as a result of what she referred to as brain damage. He wasn't Dorothy's only son to have issues, though. She explained her older son, Lee Thomas, who was 30 years old, was still living with her because he needed care around the clock. Because she said he had the mental level of a 9-year-old, still drawing with crayons and coloring books. But he would still laugh and smile when his mom talked to him. Officers in the Atchison area knew Clay Thomas very well. As a matter of fact, Clay even bragged to a reporter once that he had been in every cell in the Atchison County Jail, more than once. It's not really something to brag about, but okay. And at this point, it's July 17th, present day 2001. Detectives look, and they find out that Clay has an outstanding warrant for a parole violation. So they know that they can arrest him for that if he's inside his brother's apartment. And he was, along with his wife, Bobby Jo. At this point, only Clay is taken into custody. He and Bobby Jo had spent the last week hiding out at Clay's brother's apartment, and now he was being transported to the Sedgwick County Jail, and his wife would be asked to come in for questioning. The biggest question was, where's Angie and Ashley? The detectives called Angie's ex, Ashley's father, Bert, and let him know they found Clay Thomas. But they hadn't located Angie and Ashley. And Bert's heart dropped. He said he had a bad feeling in his gut, and he felt like this was not going to end well. It just sounded hopeless. Angie's car had clearly been stolen by this man, and he had a lengthy criminal record, and she and her child were missing. It just added to his worst nightmare. He felt like they were never going to come back. But you still want to hold on to hope, right? You still want to pray that they're going to be okay. But it just wasn't looking good. Actually, detectives were looking for bodies. The likelihood that Angie and Ashley were just waiting around somewhere unharmed was slim. And they were now fielding tips from the town of Atchison. And they were asking residents if anyone heard or seen anything suspicious in the last few weeks, especially involving a gold Grand Prix and someone matching Clay's description. They were also reaching out to Clay's family, mainly his mother, Dorothy, to see if she had spoken to her son. They knew they were close. They'd also reached out to Clay's employer, Evans United Shows, who was co-owned by husband and wife Tom and Nancy Evans from Pittsburgh, Missouri. The business had been in their family since 1947. Let's talk about that first, because I'm sure at least one of you's thinking, why was this guy who had a criminal record working near children or working at all? Don't they require background checks? Well, when investigators reached out to Nancy Evans, she said she was stunned to find out about Clay's arrest. And that to me meant that she must not have done her research. She described him as a clean-cut model employee, and she would never knowingly hire someone that she thought was dangerous. And I want to say, lady, it's not about what you think. It's about the facts. But her words exactly were, quote, "We are a place where families should be able to come and feel safe," end quote. Exactly, Nancy. That's why detectives are questioning your business practices. Nancy said she was unaware Clay had a criminal record, that her company does not do criminal checks. It does, however, check driving records since some of the employees have to drive around expensive equipment. Well, I'm glad that that's a big priority. But what about people's lives? Is there a price tag on that? Clay had only been working for the fair for about 2 months before Ashley and Angie went missing. So it didn't take long for this man to show his true colors. Nancy also said that many employees don't stay very long, they're transient, and that's why she wasn't surprised that Clay and Bobby Joe didn't come back after the Howard County Fair. That was the nature of the business. But now tips were coming in from Atchison, and there were only a couple houses on a place called Pawnee Road, way out in the middle of nowhere, close to the Atchison State Fishing Lake. So anyone that lives out there would notice if a person or a car is out of place. And once the news got out about the Gold Grand Prix, a homeowner near the lake called in and said not only did they see a gold car come down the rural dirt road a couple weeks ago, but they noticed a horrid stench coming from the woods ever since. And it's only gotten stronger. Now, this tip sent search crews out to that area on July 19th. It was just after midnight, right in the middle of a thunderstorm. They spoke to another neighbor nearby, Sunny Morans. She lived close to the woodline, and she confirmed that she noticed the smell, but she told detectives she didn't think twice about it. She just figured that an animal had died out there. Search and rescue teams began walking down this rarely used dirt road connected to a farmer's property near the lake. It was a wooded area, and the smell got stronger and stronger. It was undeniable. It was the smell of decomposition. And then they saw them. 2 badly decomposed bodies just left on the side of that dirt road, not even buried, but left out in the elements. And it was evident that they had found the remains of Ashley and Angie Hyke. The climate, it being hot and being humid and right near the lake, and the thunderstorm, it caused more rapid decomposition, but it was clear who these individuals were. A mother and daughter, the pair missing from Cresco. There was a clasp ring on Angie's finger, and there was a watch on Ashley's wrist, and they were later identified to be belonging to both of them. So this was a tentative identification. And then Bert got the call that no one wanted to receive. He remembered picking up the phone and being told that the police needed him to come down to the station. It could only be bad news, he thought, and he was right. He said the chief of police was already crying before he said anything, so he knew they were already gone. And when the words finally did come out that Angie and Ashley had been murdered, it was just heartbreaking. It made no sense. It was unbelievable. There hadn't been a murder in Cresco in over 40 years. And these two, they were undeserving of such a fate, completely innocent people. Angie's aunt, Karen Hyde, was in disbelief. She said, "That was my sweetheart and my sweet pea. I cannot believe this happened." And no one could. The entire community was just shocked. Why? That was the biggest question. And detectives believed that Clay Thomas would have that answer. He was still in custody, of course, and officers didn't hesitate to bring him in for an interview and grill him about what he knew. They asked him if he ever heard of a woman named Angie, and he admitted he met Angie and her young daughter at the Howard County Fair on June 24th. He said they chatted while Angie and her daughter stood in line for the tilt-a-whirl, which he was manning. He also admitted to giving them free rides and getting Angie's phone number that day. He said that he met up with Angie that week, and they had a date at her house when her daughter was at her father's place. He also admitted to seeing Angie again on the night of Sunday, July 8th. But he was adamant that he left on his bike later that night and both of them were alive and well. As soon as he was informed that their bodies had been found, he asked for an attorney and he would not say another word. And by now, the bodies had been transported to the medical examiner's office in Topeka, Kansas for an official identification and an autopsy. Meanwhile, Joseph Eskovic, the attorney for Howard County, had all eyes on him. He was standing in this crowded courtroom later that day, and he told the community the news. There were about 100 people in attendance wondering if Clay Thomas would be charged with murder. But that was still pending because the investigation was still going on. And then there was his wife, Bobby Jo. She was at the station in Kansas, and she was being questioned. And they were hoping that she was going to be truthful and know exactly what happened to Angie and Ashley. The community was actually outraged that Bobby Jo was just walking free and not under arrest. Because after all, she was in that video surveillance of Clay cashing one of Angie's checks. She was in the car driving around with Clay. She had to have known what he had done. There was no way she was innocent in all this, as far as the residents were concerned. But the detectives explained they had to prove that. At that point, they didn't even know how Angie and Ashley had died. But the attorney told them that he would begin the process of getting Clay charged and extraditing him back to Iowa. He said if Clay was responsible, they have no idea what the motive would have been. But his theory was that Angie and Ashley were killed at Angie's home and then put into the trunk of her car, which is why it was backed into her driveway on the morning of July 9th. The DCI agents and the crime scene technicians were still out where the bodies were found, and they were sifting through the area looking for any additional clues or evidence. And even Bobby Jo's brother-in-law came to speak out. His name was Tim Kaya, and he was married to Bobby Jo's sister. He said he was appalled by the entire situation. He told reporters that the investigators told him they weren't going to charge Bobby Jo because she was cooperating, and we're going to get to that. But she was cooperating. She was speaking with police that very day. The attorney responded and said that they were just getting started with this case. It was far from over, and it was a very sad and emotional day. But they had Clay in custody, and that was the positive part. He wasn't going anywhere. So now let's go to 25-year-old Bobby Jo, because I'm sure you're wondering, what did she tell the investigators? Well, first of all, obviously when they spoke to her, they told her, you know what? We have you in the surveillance camera. We know that you were in possession of Angie's vehicle. Clay admitted he was with Angie at her house on Sunday night. There was a neighbor who saw you and your husband outside of Angie's home that morning between 5 and 6 a.m. So they would have brought that to her attention immediately and let her know that the evidence was piling up against her. So of course, somebody's going to think to themselves, I don't want to get in trouble. I better get my story straight. They also use an emotional angle, and they tell Bobby Jo that this is a mother and a daughter, that their family just wants answers about what happened to them. And can you imagine if this was your own family? They do this to try to build rapport and to play to that person's emotions. And at first, Bobby Jo said she didn't know anything about them, but they pressed her and they showed her more evidence. Because she knew she was caught in a lie, that at least she knew something, she started to speak. She said, okay, I was in the car that morning. That was me. She had the blonde hair. The neighbor saw her. Didn't look like Angie. Remember all that? And then, of course, she was inside that store on cameras. So it matched her description. They knew it was her. She said Clay came and picked her up from the fairgrounds early that morning with the gold car. Bobby said she was caught off guard. She wanted to know where he got the car, and he said, jump in. And she asked him, where are we going? And he wouldn't answer her. He seemed like he was anxious and he was in a rush, and she started questioning him more. And that is when he put his hand around her throat while he was driving with his other hand, and he basically told her to shut up. And if she said anything else, he was going to hurt her. And then he just kept driving. And at that point, he was smoking a cigarette, and she just kept questioning about where they were going. And that's when he removed a cigarette lighter from the car and he burned her with it. I know you're probably thinking, why didn't this woman jump out of the car? And I saw some articles that I was reading about this case where people were being interviewed and they thought about the fact that she stayed in the car, didn't run away. They must have stopped between Iowa and Kansas. Like, why didn't she get out and tell anyone? They thought she was lying. But other people mentioned the fact that she could have been scared. She might have really thought that he would harm her. I mean, he did apparently just kill 2 people, right? Whether she knew about that at this point, we don't know. But she did have a burn on her arm, which she showed the detectives. And clearly, this was somebody who has escalated their behavior to the point where they had done other things in the past, and she knows he's violent, and now he might have killed people. It doesn't usually happen out of nowhere. So we know in these kind of situations, there was probably DV, it was a toxic relationship, and people are scared to leave. They're afraid of the consequences. And Bobby Joe was in tears at this point. She said that he told her that she was going to have to help him with bodies. She didn't want to, but she did. She helped him pick up the bodies from inside the house and put them inside of Angie's trunk. And then they just fled the area and they drove all the way to Kansas. The investigators wanted to know where they went next. And Bobby Joe said they actually stopped by Clay's mom's house, which was interesting. They wanted to know why, and Bobby Joe said, well, they needed a shovel because Clay was going to bury the bodies. After they retrieved the shovel, they went down to the lake, they dug a shallow grave, and they put them inside. And it was at this point that Bobby Joe became emotional. She was crying, and this is when she was talking about 8-year-old Ashley. And even though they were thankful to get this information, they wondered if this was truly a woman who was in this toxic relationship or if she had something to do with it. Because remember how Clay said that he saw Angie twice. He went to her house on a date earlier in the month and then again the second time. And then they end up dead. So the investigators aren't sure what to believe. Could Bobby Joe have been angry when she found out that maybe he cheated on her and then she killed Angela and her daughter? Maybe. Or maybe she told her husband to do it. Anything was possible. But it did seem like Bobby Joe regretted the entire situation, and she gave detectives the information on the exact location where the bodies were found. So they knew she was telling the truth about being there out by the lake. Now Clay's charges are upgraded. He's now facing 2 counts of first-degree murder in addition to stealing Angie's vehicle, and his bond is set at $1 million as he's awaiting extradition. The community wanted to know what was going to happen to Bobby Joe, and the attorneys had to let them know that she wasn't arrested, that she had completely been cleared in the crime at that point. But they couldn't say if she did have anything to do with the actual murders, so that's why she wasn't in jail. That did not go over well with this community, and sure as hell didn't go over well with Angie's family. They were angry. It was around the same time that Angie's family was putting their arrangements together for the funerals. And Clay's mother was sitting in a salon back in Atchison, Kansas, getting her hair done when the news came on a TV. And another woman in the salon said, "Oh my God, there's that man from Atchison who killed that woman and her daughter." Everyone in the salon turned to look at that screen. And that's when Dorothy said she froze. No one in there knew that the man on TV accused of such a vile crime was one of her sons. And her first thought was, it's not possible. Soon, she would be telling the same thing to police. They came to her home to ask her about her son coming over and asking for a shovel. She admitted it was true. She said it was both Clay and Bobby Joe. They just showed up out of nowhere on July 11th, and Clay said he wanted to dig up some worms to go fishing. Dorothy said that wasn't an odd request. He went fishing all the time. And Dorothy's home, as the detectives looked around, was full of photographs of all of her children. A few of Clay smiling in school photos from junior high school, and another one of him as a baby. And like a proud mother, she began telling the officers all about her lovely little boy, as if he was still that innocent little baby with a toothless smile in all those pictures that were decades old, pointing out, oh, he's 1.5 in this picture, nonchalantly showcasing her child like he wasn't in jail for murder of a child himself and a mother. It was odd. She didn't leave out that her poor Clay was brain damaged. Her words, lucky to be alive. And I mentioned that earlier and said, unlucky for his victims. I meant poor Angie and Ashley. Dorothy immediately put the blame on Bobby Joe, who she referred to as the manipulator. Dorothy insisted that this was all Bobby Joe's plan because they didn't have a car. That was the motive in her mind. Clay was pressured to obtain a car to please Bobby Joe. Dorothy said their car had broken down. They wanted to go to Mexico, and Bobby Joe kept telling Clay, we need a car. We need a car. I don't care how you get it. And then Dorothy broke down, saying how her son called her from jail and how He thinks she doesn't love him anymore. She told the detectives, I don't know what happened. I don't understand. But I know that Clay is a part of me, and he always will be, and I will always love him. She told him that. I guess a mother's love knows no bounds. And neither does a father's, because poor Bert Lucas had lost his 8-year-old little girl. And now he was left with even more questions than answers, especially after hearing what I just told you. He even said, if Clay only had the mentality of a 14-year-old, any 14-year-old would know that it's wrong to take someone else's life. So that's no excuse. But that's what it appeared to be. Another excuse for Clay's violent and vile behavior. Now, his attorney, Susan Flander, had not only proclaimed his innocence, but told the media that she planned to have a doctor confirm that Clay had a neurological impairment, and he wasn't even capable of forming the intent required for first-degree murder. Bert traveled all the way to Kansas, to the exact spot where his daughter and Angie had been left to decompose in that shallow grave, and he planted flowers over that spot, so it wouldn't be remembered as this dark and horrific place, but one of life and beauty, like the girls he remembered and loved. He told reporters that it was really hard, but it offered him some closure. He wasn't even able to look at photos of the bodies. He just couldn't. But he said in the case that this goes to trial, he would make himself look at all the evidence, just like the jury, or he would make someone else look for him. He said, if I can make someone look and they can tell that it's my daughter, if she's still recognizable, I may look, but if it's bad, I don't want to see it. And I don't blame him, because many people don't want to remember their loved ones that way. And speaking of seeing them the way that they were when they were found, the medical examiner had completed the autopsy. Dental records confirmed Angie's identity. And for Ashley, the fact that she was lying right next to her mother and she fit the description of the missing person was enough without dental records. But they tested one of her hairs that was found and a blood stain inside of the trunk of Angie's car, and both matched Ashley's DNA. The cause of death for both Angie and Ashley was asphyxiation by strangulation, and the manner of death was, of course, homicide. Now Clay had been moved to a jail in Iowa. His charges were set, and again, he called his mother, this time on July 21st. And she relayed this conversation to police. Maybe she shouldn't have, but she said, he called me and he told me he was sorry, and I asked him for what, and he confessed, saying, I did it. I killed them. He told her, I don't know why. I don't know what happened. I just snapped. And Dorothy told the media that she never raised her son to do that. And she was sobbing while she was saying all this. She said he never hurt anyone except himself. I would like to know what in the devil happened. What pushed him to that point? But I'm like, miss, he's been acting out since his early adolescence. And he has hurt people before Angie and Ashley. So what are you talking about? Are you talking about the same person? I feel like she's so in denial. But she went on to say that he told his parole officer he needed help, that he was in pain, and he was at her house on July 11th, even telling her, Mom, something's going to happen to me. I'm going to die from my injuries. And I'm thinking, what injuries he's talking about? The supposed brain damage? He was clearly functioning. And again, it was painful to read about all of these excuses that she made. But then there was this so-called confession, and it prompted police to go back and interview Clay again. This time he was in a much more vulnerable state. He knew police had talked to his wife and then talked to his mother, and he started to break down and tell them what happened on July 8th. It was absolutely chilling, sickening. According to Clay's confession, he had gone to Angie's home on the night of July 8th, the very home that he'd visited just days after meeting Angie at the Carnival. It seemed like an innocent enough encounter, one that I'm sure Angie could have never imagined would lead to tragedy. The first time he came over, it was just him and Angie, and they talked, and Angie told him that she was really sore, that her back was hurting, which prompted him to offer her a back massage. We finally know why she nicknamed him Back Rub Clay. But the next night he came over on July 8th, Clay explained that 8-year-old Ashley was home, but she was asleep upstairs. However, at some point, she woke up crying from a bad dream. Angie immediately went to comfort her daughter, soothing her from her fears and tucking her safely back into bed. And then later, after she drifted back off to sleep, Clay admitted that he and Angie spent some time together downstairs on the couch. And to warm things up, he asked her if she wanted a back massage. And she did. And she got on her stomach, face down, lying on the floor with a pillow under her head. And he straddled her from the back, like on her buttocks, and he was giving her a back massage. Eventually, they ended up engaging in consensual intimacy. But as the night wore on, something shifted in Clay. He said he suddenly decided that he would strangle Angie and steal her car and then escape town. So as she was laying her head in like the bend of his arm, like the crook of his arm near his elbow, she was laying her head while he had it propped up on the couch arm. He began to slowly make a fist and tighten his arm, tighten his bicep, and pull it towards him, strangling her. She yelled at him and asked, "What are you doing? Cut it out." And Clay yelled, "I'm going to kill you and steal your car." Angie fought to keep calm. She asked him if she could get a glass of water, and she was desperately hoping for a chance to escape. And then she saw an opportunity. She kneed him right in the groin, hoping that this would incapacitate him long enough for her to run. But Clay recovered fast, faster than she anticipated. And in his confession, Clay was breaking down. He was crying. I don't know if they were genuine tears, but he was recalling those horrific moments. He said, "I don't know what I was thinking. I wrestled her down by the front door on the floor and I finished what I started, I guess." And then he described gripping Angie's throat tightly with his hands and choking the life from her. Terrified that she was going to somehow regain consciousness, Clay said he took a sweatshirt and he tightly wrapped the arm of the sweatshirt around her neck and left her to die on her living room floor. But the nightmare didn't end there. Clay said he climbed the stairs quietly, entering the room where 8-year-old Ashley was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded downstairs. He insisted she didn't scream. She didn't fight, nothing. She just never woke up. Why? Because he wrapped a pair of pants around this little girl's neck, tightening the fabric until she stopped breathing. "You are so cold. I'm just in disbelief." And after committing these unspeakable acts, he just returned to the fairgrounds with the car and retrieved his wife. And the rest the detectives knew. When news of this confession got out, Angie and Ashley's loved ones didn't understand it. They said Angie would have gladly handed over the keys to her car if it meant keeping her and her daughter's life. It was senseless. Angie's best friend Lisa, who grew up with her, wished she would have known more information about this guy Clay. But there was no way she could have ever imagined he would kill her friend. She can't believe the heartlessness, saying that Clay thought they were nothing, that he didn't realize just how special these two people were that he took from them. Angie's aunt echoed the sentiment, saying that Ashley and Angie were so special, and Angie would have given her shirt off her own back to someone in need because she didn't want anyone to suffer. They had no enemies. There was just no reason that Clay could give for what he had done. He was just cold-blooded. And on July 27th, sadness settled over Cresco even more as 200 friends, neighbors, and family members gathered at Assumption Catholic Church to say goodbye to Angela Hyke and her daughter Ashley Lucas. Every seat was filled, and the mourners crowded closely together, standing quietly and trying to find space wherever they could. The number of people there that day spoke volumes about the lasting impact that Angie and Ashley had on their small community. And outside of her home, they had a memorial, flowers alongside pinwheels spinning in the summer breeze, and stuffed animals placed there in memory of Ashley. Each item was an expression of love and remembrance, showing just how deeply this community felt this unimaginable loss. And inside the church, memories were flowing freely during the funeral. Friends and family were sharing stories about Angie's bubbly personality, her vibrant spirit, her infectious laughter, and the kindness that defined her. But the most moving of all were the reflections of her role as a mother, her devotion to Ashley. It was something that everyone knew and admired. Their bond was precious, undeniable, and unforgettable. And now they would be together forever in death. They were finally at peace. But the case was far from being over. During the investigation, There were more things linking Clay to the crime. If his confession wasn't enough, they had answering machine messages that were left on Angie's machine in his voice from a payphone. There were those entries in her diary. And then they searched the apartment that he was staying at, his brother's house, and they found personal items like her driver's license, her social security card, and documents related to her car. There were also items in the apartment complex garbage can, like the garbage bin outside, that belonged to Angie. There was a latent fingerprint and palm print impression, as well as semen stains recovered from Angie's home that matched Clay's DNA and fingerprints. But now his defense was claiming the confession he made should be suppressed and not admitted in court. That Clay had asked for an attorney. He was given a phone book to look for one, but after hours and hours and none of them called him back, the investigators showed him more and more incriminating evidence, and he ended up speaking. But they claim that is coerced. The thing is, he actually made his confession the next day. So there was a period where he could have cooled down, thought about things, but he chose to speak. So the prosecution was arguing it should come in. But then there was another motion for a change of venue because of all the publicity this case was getting in the small town of Cresco, but the judge did allow them to move the trial, and it ended up in Alamaki County, about 75 miles away. And Clay wanted his wife to invoke her marital privilege, which would prevent a spouse from being forced to testify against the other one in court. The judge said it would consider it once the trial began, which was scheduled for April 4th of 2002, about 9 months since the murders, and just days away from what would have been Ashley's 9th birthday on April 12th. Her family was hoping that the trial would be over by then. The defense was going with, of course, the diminished capacity argument due to what they referred to as a severe car accident in 1995 when Clay was 18 years old that left him in a coma for 3 days and caused permanent brain damage, that he did not have the mental capacity for premeditation, which is necessary to convict a person of first-degree murder. But the judge did allow his wife's testimony to come in. She was actually the very first witness to testify against him. According to those that knew Bobby, she met Clay 5 years before the murders. She actually married him while he was still in jail on another charge. They started living together, and then their financial situation got very dire. They started writing bad checks, and they were hoping to flee the country to Mexico. But then their car broke down, and that's about the time the Carnival came into town, and they decided they were going to join it so that they could make it to Texas and cross the border into Mexico. They were telling this to people for months. They find out that on July 6th, Bobby Joe and Clay actually called Bobby Joe's sister and said they'd been fired from the Carnival and they needed money to get back home. Instead of giving them money, Bobby Joe's sister and her husband drove to go get them. But when they got there, they didn't want to ride. And they figured out they weren't fired. They just wanted extra money. This is also when Bobby Joe confided in her sister and her sister's husband that Clay cheated on her with some woman in town, and they were going to break up over it. But all of this was said by other people, not in court. When Bobby Joe herself took the stand, she told the jury about the night of July 8th, that Clay was gone all night, and she was waiting up for him, and he didn't come home until 6 a.m. Well, home, the fairgrounds. And when he came back, she saw him driving a stolen gold car. She explained how he pulled in and he told her to pack up all their belongings and get in the car with him. And it was while they were driving that he told her he had to get rid of a couple of bodies. She told the court that she objected to all of this, but then he retaliated by actually taking the cigarette lighter from the car and burning her with it. Bobby Joe explained they continued driving and ended up at Angie's house. And when they walked in, she saw Angie on the floor, and Ashley was lifeless right next to her. They then loaded them into the trunk of Angie's car and they drove to Kansas to bury them in the shallow grave. She seemed to be very cooperative on the stand until the defense attorney started cross-examination, and they accused her of lying and asking her why she didn't run away when they stopped for gas on their way to Kansas, and why she spent a week with Clay at his brother's apartment. She had all that time to go to police. Her answer was, "I was scared, okay?" She yelled this back at them. The defense then wanted to drive home the point that the investigators told Bobby Joe that as long as she cooperated against her husband, she wouldn't be charged with the murders. She admitted that she understood that that was the agreement. This was to try to impeach her. This was to try to discredit her account of what happened. But one of the hardest parts for the family members to listen to was when the forensic expert Dr. Eric Mitchell came to the stand. He was the forensic pathologist that did the autopsy. And he talked about how there was a sweatshirt tied tightly around Angie's neck and the leg of a pair of blue jeans around Ashley's. He described this was asphyxiation due to ligature strangulation. He said this was done with what he described as a simple loop like you would use to tie your shoelaces, but they were tied so tightly it restricted the airway of the victims. And there was no clothing on Angie's body at all except for the white sweatshirt around her neck. That's how she was found. And what was even more sickening was that the lower portion of Ashley was also unclothed. She was wearing a t-shirt and the jeans around her neck. Midway through Clay Thomas's trial, a chilling silence overtook this entire courtroom because they played Clay's recorded confession. His voice was just echoing throughout this entire room as he was recounting very calmly these horrific details of what happened to Angie and Ashley in their final moments. Ashley's father, Bert, was just sitting there. He was shaking. His hands were on his face. His face was like buried down into his hands as he was leaning over. And his tears were just streaming down his face uncontrollably. You could tell this man was overwhelmed by grief, by anger, and the pain of having to hear how his daughter's life had been taken. Everyone in the courtroom was seeming to struggle with all this raw emotion and the impact of this confession. The defense team then stepped forward with their own and very different argument. They claimed that Clay suffered from significant brain damage due to that serious car accident. And according to them, his brain injury was so severe, it impaired his judgment, his impulse control, and it made him unable to fully grasp the consequences of his actions. And with his defense, they hoped to cast doubt on his mental capacity, especially at the time of the murders, obviously, and that would potentially reduce his culpability in the eyes of the jury. But could damage like this really explain something so calculated and methodical? A murder this cold? Well, it raised doubts. And when the prosecution laid out everything, it took less than 2 hours for the jurors to deliberate. And they came back with a verdict. Guilty on both counts of first-degree murder. And each one of those counts was a mandatory life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict came just a day before Ashley's 9th birthday, and her father, Bert, said he could finally sleep now. He was going to miss the hugs the most because he got one every single day, and he remembered the last day he ever saw his daughter. He said he put sunscreen on her before she left for that canoe trip. She gave him a hug and she said, "See you later, Dad. I love you." And he wanted everyone to know that you never realize when it could be the last time you see someone that you love. He told reporters that he was going to celebrate Ashley's birthday with his family at Silver Lake in Minnesota, where they used to feed the geese together on vacation. And as for Angie's family, they made a statement through their attorney, and they wanted to say that they thank God for giving them Ashley and Angela in the first place, even if they only had them for a brief amount of time. They thanked the team of prosecutors and the community for all their support. And during the sentencing hearing, Bert actually addressed Clay. He said, "I hope you rot in hell." And the victim impact statements were full of emotion. They explained all the pain that Clay caused to so many people and the lives he stole away. And Bert went on to say that because of you, I had to do the unthinkable. I had to bury my daughter 6 feet underground. And many friends and family talked about how traumatized they were and how they could never forgive Clay for what he had done. The judge then turned to Clay and asked, "Is there anything you want to say before your sentencing?" And he kind of touched the corner of his mouth a couple times, but then he declined to say anything. And then the judge told him that he needed to start taking responsibility for his actions, that he showed a lack of remorse, and he doesn't even consider him being human because he doesn't feel bad for what he did. There were people in this courtroom that would look at him and say, "You have nothing to say for yourself for what you've done," but he never spoke. But his mom did. She talked to him before his sentencing and she told the media that she wished to God this never happened. And she felt so sorry for the family, but added, "I know the pain they're going through," which I personally found, Kimber personally found to be very insensitive. She knows the pain they're going through. She went on to reiterate the defense's argument that he suffered from diminished capacity from his head injury. And she says, he doesn't even know half of what's going on. But that can't be true. But at least he can never hurt anyone again. And he tried to appeal, but they were denied. Years later in 2016, the 39-year-old was in the news again for apparently trying to violate his cellmate in prison. Yep. He attempted to force himself on another inmate, claiming the inmate owed him $2 that he let him borrow. When the inmate refused, he started to choke him. And when the inmate was calling for help from the cell, he was like, "I'm not scared about killing anyone." This is what Clay said. "I'm not scared about killing anyone. I'm already serving 2 consecutive life sentences." So his cellmate was attacked. He sustained injuries to his neck. He also sustained injuries down below in the southern region because of the attack. And when they tried to bring disciplinary actions against Clay, he said, "Oh, my cellmate's injuries, that's from him shaving. And the other ones, that's from really tough toilet paper he wipes too hard." But you know what? I have heard enough. I really don't want to end this video talking about this monster. So let's bring the story back to the most important people, Angie and Ashley. They did nothing wrong except trust a man who came off as charming and generous, only to find themselves dead at his hands over nothing. 2 innocent lives taken far too soon. So please remember them and please be safe. These videos are not to fill you with fear. That's not their purpose. Instead, they're to arm you with the knowledge to protect yourself and also to love everyone around you. Give them your time because you never know when it is your last goodbye. I'll see you in my next video.